Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more kind soul stories. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe. Spread kindness, share love. Late one cold night in New York, Emma pulled her worn-out jacket tighter as the icy wind cut through the busy streets. Driving for a rideshare company was never her dream, but it was what kept food on the table for her and her 7-year-old son, Noah. Most nights were a blur of strangers, some polite, some rude, most forgettable. But this night felt different. The streets of Manhattan glowed with neon signs, and laughter spilled out of crowded bars. Emma sighed, hoping her next passenger wouldn't be trouble. Her phone buzzed with a request near a high-end club on Fifth Avenue. When she pulled up, she noticed a man leaning against the building, his tall frame unsteady. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and his tie hung loosely around, his neck as if he had given up on appearances halfway through the night. His glossy eyes and struggling to stay awake made it clear his phone still lying forgotten on the seat. Emma almost groaned. Drunk passengers often meant spilled drinks, slurred insults, or worse. But when he looked at her with a mixture of exhaustion and emptiness, she hesitated. Something about him wasn't loud or obnoxious like the others she had driven before. He just seemed tired. The man slid into the back seat, fumbling with his phone before dropping it on the floor. "Central Park Tower," he mumbled. His voice was deep but thick with weariness. Emma adjusted the rearview mirror, catching a better glimpse of his face under the dim streetlights. He was handsome in a refined sort of way, with sharp features and graying temples that made him look both powerful and vulnerable at the same time. She realized he wasn't just any wealthy man heading home from a night of drinks. There was something heavy weighing on him, something deeper than intoxication. Emma tapped the address into her GPS, her curiosity rising as the car glided toward the shimmering skyline. The ride was quiet, except for the hum of the engine and the faint sound of his uneven breathing. She kept stealing glances, wondering what kind of life someone like him lived. His watch alone looked like it could pay her rent for months. Yet he sat there slouched, looking lonelier than she ever felt on her hardest days. Emma gripped the steering wheel tighter. Wealth, she thought, didn't always shield people from pain. Maybe money couldn't buy peace after all. As they approached Central Park, the buildings grew taller, sleeker, and more luxurious. Emma slowed down, marveling at the sight of the towering glass structures she could only ever dream of entering. The GPS announced their arrival at an exclusive residence, one of those penthouses that overlooked the park and sparkled like a jewel in the city's crown. She parked by the entrance, expecting him to stumble out and disappear behind the guarded doors. But when he didn't move, she turned to see him, struggling to stay awake, his phone still lying. For a moment, she wondered if she should help. With a deep breath, Emma stepped out of the car and walked around to his side. She gently opened the door, offering her hand to steady him. He blinked at her, confusion flickering across his face, as though he couldn't understand why someone would bother to help. His words were slurred. "Phone. My phone." She reached inside, picking it up from where it had fallen, and slipped it into his pocket. Then, guiding him carefully, she led him toward the building's front entrance. The doorman raised his eyebrows in surprise, but one look at the man seemed to explain everything. The doorman nodded respectfully and hurried to assist, calling the elevator. Emma couldn't help but notice how everyone around treated him differently, like he wasn't just a man but someone important. She stayed quiet, not asking questions, not prying. All she wanted was to make sure he was safe. Once inside the elevator, he leaned against the wall, his eyes half closed. For a second, Emma almost felt sorry for him. Here he was, dressed in a suit worth more than her entire wardrobe, living in a building she could never even afford to visit. Yet he looked utterly lost. When they reached the top floor, the elevator doors opened to reveal a stunning penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows and a breathtaking view of the glittering city. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The place looked like a magazine spread, filled with sleek furniture, expensive art, and a quiet emptiness that made it feel more like a museum than a home. She guided him to the couch, carefully lowering him down. For a moment, she hesitated, unsure if she should leave. But then she placed his phone on the glass table beside him and whispered softly, "Take care of yourself." He didn't reply. Emma turned to leave, her footsteps echoing against the marble floor. As she closed the door behind her, she couldn't shake the strange feeling that lingered in her chest. She had driven countless passengers before, but something about this one was different. Maybe it was the loneliness she had seen in his eyes, or the way he seemed weighed down by invisible burdens. She didn't know his name, didn't know his story, and she assumed she never would. All she knew was that tonight she had chosen kindness over judgment, and somehow it felt important, more important than she realized. What Emma didn't know was that the man she had just helped wasn't an ordinary businessman, returning home from a late night. His name was Daniel Carter, one of the most powerful CEOs in New York, the head of a billion-dollar tech empire. To the world, he was a success story, a man with everything, wealth, power, influence. But behind closed doors, he was just another lonely soul, worn down by endless pressure and empty relationships. And though Emma left without expecting anything in return, her small act of kindness had quietly planted a seed, one that would soon change both of their lives forever. The kind that reminded him of college days he hadn't thought about in years. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of his penthouse, making him squint as he tried to recall the events of the night before. Fragments floated back, cold air, a car ride, a gentle voice. He rubbed his temples, wondering if it had been real or just his imagination. Then his eyes fell on the glass coffee table. There, neatly placed beside his phone, was a small handwritten note. "You dropped this. Take care of yourself." Daniel stared at the note longer than he should have. Most people in his world didn't leave behind kindness. They left invoices, requests, or hidden motives. This wasn't a business card, a networking attempt, or a demand. It was simple, almost startling in its sincerity. For years, his life had been full of assistants, investors, and people who smiled too easily when he entered a room. Yet, none of them had ever written something so plain and human. He picked up the note again, rereading it like it held a secret. He unlocked his phone and scrolled through the rideshare app. It didn't take long to find her profile, Emma R. The name sounded ordinary, but something about it already felt familiar. Her driver rating was high, her reviews polite but forgettable. There was nothing remarkable about her, at least on paper. Still, Daniel felt an odd pull. He knew he could easily move on with his day, ignore the memory, and drown himself back in board meetings and endless schedules. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't want to. He wanted to know her. After pacing the living room for several minutes, Daniel finally pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before a cautious female voice answered. "Hello?" Emma sounded guarded, as if she was already preparing for trouble. Daniel hesitated before speaking. This is Daniel. You drove me home last night." There was a silence, then a careful reply. "Oh, I hope everything's fine now." Emma braced herself, expecting him to complain about her bringing him inside, or worse, accusing her of something. Instead, his voice softened. "I just wanted to say thank you." Emma was taken aback. In her experience, wealthy men rarely remembered kindness from strangers, let alone acknowledged it. She sat in her small kitchen, still in her faded work clothes from the night before, he pressed, glancing at the dishes piled up in the sink. "You don't need to thank me," she replied quickly. "It was just my job." But Daniel wasn't satisfied with that. "No," he insisted gently. "You went beyond that. Most people wouldn't have bothered. I'd like to repay you, at least buy you a cup of coffee." Emma almost laughed at the absurdity. A billionaire asking her to coffee? She shook her head, even though he couldn't see it. "That's really not necessary," she said. But Daniel didn't sound like a man who was trying to impress her or fulfill an obligation. He sounded sincere. It would mean a
lot to me, he pressed, his tone almost vulnerable.
Emma hesitated. Part of her screamed that it was crazy, dangerous even, to meet someone like him. Yet another part of her, the part that remembered his lonely expression, in the car, whispered that maybe it wouldn't hurt. Finally, she sighed. "All right, just coffee. Nothing fancy." Daniel smiled for the first time in days. They met at a small cafe tucked away from the usual Manhattan chaos. Emma arrived early, nervously fidgeting with her coat, feeling completely out of place. When Daniel walked in, dressed sharply but with a genuine smile instead of his usual guarded expression, she almost didn't recognize him. He greeted her warmly like they were old friends. Over steaming cups of coffee, the conversation started cautiously. Small talk about the city, the weather, her long hours of driving. But soon it shifted unexpectedly into deeper territory. Daniel asked about her son, and Emma found herself sharing pieces of her life she rarely told strangers. Daniel listened intently, not interrupting, not offering shallow advice. He was used to boardrooms and investors, but with Emma he felt no need to perform. She spoke about her struggles balancing motherhood and work, about the night she drove until dawn just to make rent. To his own surprise, he opened up about his loneliness, about how success had built walls around him instead of bridges. "People see the money, not the man," he admitted quietly. Emma studied him for a moment and said simply, "Maybe you've been looking in the wrong places." It was the kind of honesty he craved. Their coffee meetings became a quiet routine, once a week, then twice until it felt natural. Emma never treated him like a billionaire. She teased him when he stumbled over casual slang, laughed when he admitted he couldn't cook, and scolded him when he looked too tired from overworking. In return, Daniel admired her resilience, her straightforwardness, and the way she never asked for anything from him. She wasn't dazzled by his money or status. If anything, she seemed determined to ignore it. That alone made her different from everyone else in his carefully curated circle. Over time, the conversations deepened. They spoke about dreams, Emma's hope of opening a small bakery one day, Daniel's secret wish to step away from corporate battles and live a simpler life. They spoke about fears, hers of failing her son, his of never finding someone who loved him for himself. And in those exchanges, something fragile but undeniable grew between them. Daniel found himself looking forward to her texts, her laughter, her presence more than any business deal. Emma, against her better judgment, felt drawn to him too, not for his wealth, but for the way he saw her. Emma often wondered why he had chosen her, of all people to confide in. She was just a driver, barely scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck. Yet Daniel never made her feel small. In fact, he seemed to admire her strength. He once told her, "You remind me that life isn't about what I own, it's about who I am." Those words stayed with her, softening the doubts that constantly gnawed at her. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Her act of kindness that night had set something extraordinary in motion. And so, without realizing it, Emma had become the light in Daniel's otherwise gray world. A single mother who had once been invisible to society had unknowingly touched the heart of a man surrounded by everything money could buy. What started as a late-night ride had blossomed into a bond built on truth, laughter, and an honesty neither of them had experienced before. Emma had no idea where their story was heading. But she knew this: sometimes the smallest choices, the simplest kindness could change a life, and hers had just intertwined with his in a way neither could undo.